So we're very privileged to be here today. My memory of Liberty starts when, for the centenary exhibition at the V&A, which was 50 years ago. There was a groundbreaking exhibition at the V&A, which I was lucky enough to then go and work for later on. And now here we are 50 years later, celebrating the 150th anniversary. So it's a wonderful tie-up. And as Edwina and others will know, I had tried for many years to get a book on aesthetic, artistic dress, whatever. And finally, I've managed to achieve it, albeit focused on liberty and the importance of liberty. So it's a celebration all round. So I wanted to ask a few questions. I'm not going to ask any technical questions because we have so many brilliant people here from the V&A, William Morris, Mary Shozer and others, etc. that I know that's not my area of expertise. So we've got some basic background to the book which Anna's going to tell us about. So first of all, Anna, will you tell us how you got into working for Liberties and your background?
Well, you mentioned Mary Shozer. She's the person who put me here. I used to be a costume designer, and then I worked for the BBC for a number of years, and they were in the process of divesting themselves of all the art departments, and I jumped earlier and got an early redundancy, and it paid for an MA at the Courtauld. And Mary was one of my tutors, and she said, "You're an archivist," and then she made me one.
And so you came to Liberty as the archivist?
So I came to Mary was asked to set up a project to catalogue the archive, because the archive at that point was in a warehouse in South London, and it was all over the floor, and when designers wanted to look for anything, they just scrabbled around and tore things out of books, and nobody had looked after it. And so Mary was asked to set it up, and she put me in place.
Right. And was that all on your own, or did you have help with the archive?
I had huge help from Mary to start with,
right.
and then eventually we had a student.
We had someone doing the camera work.
Yeah.
Right.
But that was later. I started off by photocopying things.
Yeah.
So I started in '96 as a freelancer, and then they got fed up with me going off and doing other jobs, and so I became staff.
A full-timer, right. And you retired from that last year?
I've now retired, no, more than that. I retired 2 years ago.
Right,
3 years.
okay. But the archive is still here, or partly here?
A small amount of the archive is still here, but most of it, when it was in the warehouse, it was all together, and then we moved to Regent Street, and I was in a big space in the Regent Street building, which isn't Liberty anymore, and I had it all there. And then they sold the Regent Street building, and so I was moved into this building. And so it slowly shrunk, the archive, and more was put into storage.
Right.
And in the end, the storage became so expensive, and we were growing out of the space, because we're still producing fabrics. Of course, and so this is a fabric archive. The main documentary archive is held by Westminster Archives. And so I moved it out of London, which I regret enormously, because it's much less accessible. But
it's still there, which is the important thing, yes.
And I didn't really have a choice.
And is an archive still being added to then all the time?
All the time,
right. Wow, phenomenal, right. So we know there's lots of books on Liberty over the years, and I think I have most of them. So what's so different about this book with all those others, of which you mentioned in your book as well?
A lot of people have written about Liberty dress, but always as a sort of a little note in a wider part of a wider subject. But nobody's concentrated entirely on Liberty dress, and so that I thought I was
right. Because, as you said, there's lots of histories, centenary books, Stephen Calloway, Alison's book, etc.
Yeah.
So it's unique because you're dealing with the period between 18.
So I've extended it because the first chapter sort of precedes the dress department, but the dress department was opened in 1884.
Right.
And I sort of decided to finish in 1917 when Arthur Liberty died.
Right.
But I pushed it on to 1920.
And then we've got
and then I've got a postscript about what happened next.
to show the continuing influence
Exactly.
of liberty, etc. Right. At this stage, just talking, the first time I think I met you was when we did the earlier book on the 50s
Yes.
and 60s. So it's great that we've now had the two
Yes.
periods covered, sort of
Yes.
thing. I asked you right at the beginning, and I'm sure most of you are going to know, but I don't, which is, or I didn't. Would you explain to us the difference between artistic and aesthetic dress? Because I'm sure this is going to be a controversial one.
It's such a difficult
Exactly.
because people have written about it and get quite cross about it. But I think the aesthetic the aesthetic movement is a very specific thing, whereas it was not everybody who was interested in the aesthetic movement. Let me just think of artistic is wider,
right. Yes.
and I think people still consider themselves. A lot of customers who come to Liberty still consider themselves to be rather artistic and not aesthetic.
Okay, and in fact, one of the questions was, who was the customer at the period that we're talking about? Well, are these all very wealthy customers?
I mean, Liberty's never been a cheap store, so it was always of a certain income.
Right.
But it was always people who were interested in the arts, who were some of them artists themselves, patrons of the arts. And yes.
Because Liberty himself was so well connected, wasn't he? So
he started off across the road in Regent Street in the Oriental Bazaar, selling Japanese artifacts, and people like Whistler and Rossetti would go there and buy their Japanese prints and their blue and white china.
Right.
And they followed him across the road when he opened his shop here.
Right.
As did Godwin.
Yes, exactly. Who then? Yes. But do you want to explain the importance of Godwin?
So Godwin, I mean, everybody here knows.
Well, there'll be a few who don't.
Everybody here, most people know much more about him than I do. And but he was an architect. He was really interested in and very knowledgeable about Japan. He also designed furniture. He designed costumes for the stage. He was a member of the then Costume Society, which had nothing to do with the Costume Society today. And he was very interested in dress reform. And he knew Liberty from the very early days. And one of the very first descriptions of Liberty's shop is by him.
All right.
And so Liberty obviously knew him very well and decided that he would be the man to start the dress collection.
And how long was he there for?
Not very long,
Right.
because he died 2 years afterwards.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
So I don't think he
But nevertheless, he was the
was the sort of name
influence.
that they used to start with.
And then one thing that this book has that the others certainly don't have, which I found very interesting, was the names of all the people.
Yes.
Would you explain where those came from and the importance of why you insisted on our including
Yes,
these
I
in
did
the book?
insist.
You did.
Because I was a costume designer at one point, I know that as a costume designer, certainly in film and television, you don't make anything yourself. You present somebody with a drawing, or maybe even just a picture, and then some very clever cutter and amazing seamstresses make these fantastic dresses, and nobody knows their names. And that's the same as the dresses that came out were made in the Liberty costume studio, as they called it, and nobody knows their names. And so I've found I found a lot of names. Not every name is going to be in that book, because in the end, because of you sort of poo-pooed it, I decided to only
We
name.
had to publish the book.
I only named the people whose roles I knew.
Right.
And I found those in the Westminster Archive. You've got some staff records; they're not complete, but you have got I was able to find quite a lot. And in our archive, we've got this fantastic certificate that the staff made to thank Liberty for being one of the very early closing days. Everybody used to work 5 or 6 days a week, and he did early closing on a Saturday before most other stores, and so all their names are on there. So there are sources.
And what I found interesting in your book was then reading from people who had then spoken to people during the centenary
Yes,
year,
that's-
who had then worked
yes.
here, and getting their voice
Yes.
coming through as well,
Yes.
which again is
Yes.
really unique and everything. You spoke about fabrics and everything, so they were being bought in from abroad and everything. When did they start to create their own? When did Liberty start to create its own?
So Liberty went to Thomas Wardle. Thomas Wardle was a dyer and printer in Leek in Staffordshire, who had worked with William Morris, redeveloping vegetable dye, and so Liberty went up to him as well, and Wardle created a whole range of colours for the Liberty silks, and they were then immediately known as Liberty Art Colours. And
They were exclusive to Liberty? Or?
yes,
Right.
and they were very, the people write about the windows of Liberty where they sort of hang in gradating colours, and they sort of picture, and so it was a really important. And Wardle then started to print for Liberty as well. So those were the earliest fabrics, and I think that it's probably 1879 or something like that we see the first Wardle prints.
Right. And then Liberty in time bought.
So then they didn't just the fabric department started to grow, and they didn't just use Wardle. They used other printers, and they one of the printers that they used was in Merton, Merton Abbey, and they printed so much for Liberty that they said at the end of the 19th century, "Why don't you take us over?"
Which they did do.
Which they did in
until about the
1904.
70s or
1972.
right. Wow. And otherwise, were they buying from abroad as well in the same way?
We don't really know. There are some woven silks that I remember Linda Parry thought were French.
Right.
But she had no
And from
proof
Asia?
of that. From?
Asia?
Well, that's where all the fabrics originally came from.
Right, okay.
And the silks definitely came from
Okay.
from India and China and Japan.
And in those early years, and again, this is in the book, you discuss how a lot of those patterns carry on for many years. So to
Yes.
date is really difficult.
It's impossible.
Exactly, as some of you will know. But then they also had this big historic costume thing as well, which seems very
So
strange.
that is very much tied to the aesthetic movement.
Right.
Those people like Mary Howes, who wrote The Art of Dress, and thought that it was a really good idea to look at paintings to be inspired by your dress, and then you could never be dated because you were never modern.
No, right.
So that was very much part of that. But they were also, Liberty was not just interested in the aesthetic movement, but they were also very interested in dress reform.
Right.
And all their lovely soft silks worked much better for these aesthetic shapes and these reform shapes than they did for mainstream fashion. It was much too soft, the silks that Liberty sold.
I also love the idea of people serving in the shop in historic costume as
Yes.
well, and the one who dressed as
I
Elizabeth
know,
I
into
or
the
whatever.
1930s.
Exactly. I think this is something you may consider doing now. Certainly bringing the tourist market still further. One of the things that I'm very pleased about this particular book is that I'm a trustee with Judy and Peter with the Albert Dawson Education Trust, and we went to the V&A. We've had, I think, something like 20 or so of the trade catalogues digitized, photographed, and we've included them in the book as well. So there's a great selection of archival material that hasn't been seen before, and indeed that is now made available online so that people can access it as well. Would you just explain the importance of the trade catalogues and indeed how they were used?
So the very earliest that we know of is from 1881. And it's called Eastern Art Manufacturers and Decorative Objects from Persia, India, China, and Japan. I looked it up this morning, and it's like a book. I mean, it's a hardcover. It's quite hefty, and it's full of exactly what this is. What they say, it's objects from all these different countries.
Right.
And it's a wonderful resource.
Absolutely.
And then they started to produce their own things, and so they started to produce catalogues showing what a customer could buy, because they were selling all over the country, all over the world, and so people could. I mean, for instance, the dress catalogues. I've put all the dress catalogues in the book. I haven't put any of the other ones in the book, and I think quite a lot of the catalogues just for fabrics as well, and you could, if you wanted a particular dress, once they started to produce these dress catalogues, if you wanted to have a dress, there was perforated pages, and you could just tick the one that you wanted and send it off, and then they'd make it.
Yeah.
And if you had enough money, people would travel the country and come and fit it for you. So it was quite a service in those days. Bring it back.
And then the other element is that working along with Michelle, we have got the most incredible range of photography as well. Where did that photography come from, and where are the clothes now stored? Again, I know you've listed them in the catalogue.
So I had a wish list.
Of which, most of which, I think we managed.
We got the majority, and Michelle, who is the picture researcher, was the person who actually managed to get all this stuff. It's amazing what she managed to get, but we were really there were several things that stopped us from getting the things we wanted. One was 2 major collections were closed.
We won't say who those were.
And then for doing research now is so much easier. The British Newspaper Library is the most amazing resource. You just put in keywords and thousands of articles come towards you, particularly if you put in liberty. But then the British Library was hacked, and suddenly we couldn't get all these images. And Michelle did wonders with finding the alternatives.
But otherwise, as you say, we've included the V&A, we've got the Met, to get images of costumes from museums it's quite some of it's quite hard, because you want something and it's expensive to mount a costume, especially for a book, and photograph it. That's not going to happen. So you're really stuck with what is available. Right.
Actually, there's a lot of it is available. It's not as, I'm not complaining, but there are some that I'm so sad that we couldn't include.
But I think we managed to achieve most, didn't we? Yes. And indeed, the cover, which is behind you now, is
amazing.
Which is a John Bright from Cosmos collection, etc.
Yes.
And then the back, which I also love and was quite tempted to have as a front cover, but not allowed, is from the Museum of London. And Adrian,
the London Museum.
Sorry, the London Museum, as it now is. Yes. But
so again, they were closed, and we could. They had images, but most of them not of high enough quality.
Yeah.
And so Beatrice very kindly had some things photographed, not mounted.
Right.
And so we were able to put some of the stuff in that we wanted and would otherwise not have happened.
And we know the importance of liberty within the arts and crafts of the Art Nouveau. We know about still liberty, which is how the arts and crafts is known in Italy, etc.
Art Nouveau.
Art Nouveau. Sorry. Proving point. Yeah. How the importance of liberty can't be stressed enough, really, can it? Because it was so influential in the UK, it spread out, etc.
Yes.
And I think this is the sort of the main period where we've got so many, people involved with it. We've got Archibald Knox, who's been celebrated on the Isle of Man at the moment with a year-long exhibition. Liberty, the name just goes on forever and ever, doesn't it? One can't stress the importance enough.
It's a brilliant name.
Exactly. I think that is basically, you'll be relieved to know my end of my basic questions. Are there any questions that people
I just want to say that the majority of the people here helped create this book.
Right.
I mean, I sat on my own writing it, but then after that I gave the manuscript, and then it was doctored and amended and changed and bettered by all these people who are here. So it's a
collaborative thing.
It's a collaborative.
And then from our end, we have Leonie who's done the production, Daphne who's done the editorial, etc.
Exactly.
So we brought all these people
Yes.
together, etc.
Yeah.
And as you say, a lot of whom know a hell of a lot more than I do. So I will throw open the discussion, and I have a question at the back already.
I look forward to opening the answer might be in there, but I wondered whether how often you find that there's a Liberty dress that do they always have labels? No, if they don't, how do you know it's Liberty?
So you can't prove it. But
Can we just say?
Sorry, yes, I'll
we're
say.
just because we're recording it as well.
Liberty. The question is about labels in Liberty dresses, and very often there aren't labels in Liberty dresses because they've disappeared. I cut out labels and they you can the fabric gives it away. I think there's a dress in the book it's at the Met in New York, and they showed it to me and said, we think this is Liberty, we don't know for sure. It's a favourite dress of Andrew Bolton. He's had it in 2 exhibitions, and I thought it was Liberty because it looked but I couldn't prove it because I never saw it in any of the catalogues. But the silk was it felt like a Liberty fabric. But then I found in the newspaper library all these weddings that are described, and there's one wedding that's described, and I told the people this morning about it, and I'm going to read it to you because it's so funny, if I can find it.
Well, whilst you're finding it, in the book, Rowan, there is a double-page spread, I think, or 3/4-page spread of a variety of different labels, and it's amazing the variety of different styles.
Yes. So you can't date from the label, which is also annoying. But this is a newspaper article about a wedding, and they describe a Mrs. Miles Kennedy, the bride's sister-in-law. And she wore a beautiful costume made by Liberty of rich white silk crepe and a large hat with upturned petals and crown representing a water lily, and carried a huge bouquet of water lilies tied with wide Liberty ribbon. I mean, I just felt so sorry for the bride. but he wears a dress that is just like that one at the Met. So I put them together.
Peter.
The basic textiles before anything's happened to them, were they made in this country or in India?
So in the early days, they would have come from India, from China, from Japan, and they were dyed there. I think you agree with that. But then they decided. He writes in the catalogue, or he writes in an article. We decided that the quality wasn't consistent enough, and so that's why he went to Wardle to get them dyed. He imported the fabrics and got them dyed here, and then as the production got bigger and bigger, they started to make silk here as well, and so a lot of those lovely pattern silks, the lovely child's dress that's in the book is probably Spitalfields. Because Liberty was very much part of that whole English silk revival, the Silk Association.
And within the book, you've got various pages from with the silk swatches and whatever, which are beautiful and just lovely.
From our pattern books.
Exactly, lovely in their own case. Yeah.
Yes.
Mr. Liberty was very keen on dress reform.
Yes.
Mrs. Liberty seemed to dress more conservatively.
Yes, I agree.
Have you found any evidence that she wore artistic
No,
dress?
no. The only images I've ever seen of her, she wears very conservative dress. So no, no, obviously not.
Any other questions? There's someone with a hand up. Yes.
Is there like a favourite story or a favourite dress?
Favourite dress? Yeah. I love that dress. It's such a beautiful dress. And Mrs. Miles Kennedy is definitely a favourite.
Hi, Anna, can you say something about the embroidery?
Oh, of course, sorry, yes. We must have something about the embroidery.
We've been asked about the embroidery, yes.
Because these, we have these workrooms here, and they're so skilled, these people, because not only did they cut the dresses and then sew them and smock them, but they are so beautifully embroidered. Those early dresses, and they're stunning. And they, yes, I mean, I don't know what else you want me to
Well,
say.
do we know who was designing the patterns?
No. I found designers, but I think they were the dress designers. But very few. And I found embroiderers, and I don't know, because there seems to be only one name that is definitely attached to the costume workroom, but there must have been lots of them because there's so much embroidery. And so I don't know if there's a crossover between the embroiderers in the workroom and the embroiderers who worked in the needlework department, because they had a needlework department, doing all these thick kits and things that people could make at home, and you could ask an embroiderer to start you off and do all that, and give you advice.
I was wondering whether Anne Macbeth perhaps had any input.
Possibly, but I have no idea.
Who was Anne Macbeth?
Anne Macbeth is one of the Glasgow School embroiderers,
right.
and she definitely designed some needlework patterns for Liberty.
Okay. Along with Jessie and King and the work that she was doing, yes.
Yes.
Okay. Michelle.
How large is your own personal collection of Liberty?
We don't have a very large.
No, your own collection.
Oh, mine? No, only two. I've only got two.
But you're right, they get very good pictures, because I commented on that, yes.
No, I because I used to do lecturing, and so I would take these things along to show people, and so that's why I bought them. And now they're just sitting in a box. I need to get rid of them. No. No, keeping dress is much too hard a thing to do.
But what we do have in the book then is a listing of where you can
I've
find...
tried to make it as complete a list, but I'm sure other people will come out of the woodwork.
Which is great, and that's
which will
what
be
it's all
good.
about.
And
yes.
it's already out of date, because the Totnes collection has now gone to Falmouth University. So-
Okay. Well, that can be incorporated within the reprint in due course. Right.
That other dress was the label put.
That depended, but usually in the neck, in the back of the neck. And yes, that's where the early ones were definitely on the waistband.
And some were on the tassels.
That's in the cloaks.
Right.
Yes.
Right, which is
They're
lovely.
hidden. Yes.
Right.
Yes. When the cloaks were double-sided, so you could reverse it, you didn't want a label anywhere, so
Yes.
then they were in the tassel.
Yeah, very clever.
Yeah. Yes, that's a good idea.
Any other questions? Well, from my side, over in the corner, yes.
This is a thank you again for the registration, but Anna, I think, would be one of the most influential figures in the history of liberties, and I can see this as a business stakeholder. She's been way more than an archivist, a coach, a gardener, and I think today, if Yale Press agrees, obviously an historian of liberty.
Yes, of course, absolutely.
And my question is, fascinating to see how much in our business practice today we are heavily dependent on the constant renewal of the art of print, and wearable prints, and obviously the lifestyle prints that you live in, not just to wear. And looking at the early days of artistic dress, it's actually looking quite minimal.
Yes. No print.
And so I don't know if this is maybe an opportunity for a second book about artistic dress. But I wonder, Anna, if you could shed light as to what happens from those days, when the last chapter into the potentially further chapter, and how we went from that strong, authentic, I think iconic style, though not always signed, into these print.
Well, I do get you there, because in the 20th century, more and more dresses get ready-made, and I wanted that in the title, and that was thrown out. And
although you did prove that it did say ready to wear or whatever very early on, but I just thought it would confuse the market.
And so there is a picture at the end of a floral voile dress that's ready-made, and I think that's the beginning of what people now associate with liberty. And so yes.
So from my side, I just also want to thank Liberty, who have just been so helpful, obviously to you, but to us as well, in every respect. They very generously have given you order copy of the book, which Anna, I think, will sign if you wish. And you also have been offered tea as well. So thank you all for coming, and that's it.
Thank you very much.